Hey guys, John from SNS Cycle here. In today's video, we're going to be showing you how to install the SNS cam chest kit for the Milwaukee 8 engine. We'll be going over the cam plate, the oil pump, the tappet cups, the camshaft, precision tappets, push rods, and push rod tubes. For this install, we have our Road King on the rack. It's a 107 Milwaukee 8. We have decided to pair the Milwaukee 8 with our Chain 475 cam. Let's get started with teardown. Now that we've disassembled the engine per the factory manual, we're ready to install our new oil pump. Before we do that, there's a couple things that we want to review. First off, do we have the correct oil pump for our engine? This engine is a 107 M8 and it's oil cooled. The indication right here is an O, so it's an oil cooled oil pump. We do offer a water cooled oil pump, which would have a W where the O is. This is an O, oil, we're ready to put it in. Next, we want to review the inner cam bearing. The inner cam bearing needs to be loose, smooth, and easy for rotation. Our inner cam bearing is in good condition. Within the SNS kit, we do supply a replacement inner cam bearing. If you need to do that, follow the instructions with the correct tools to replace it. One last thing, SNS oil pumps manufactured after 2019 include this ridge right here, which on certain models of the M8 included this O-ring gasket that would slot right into that groove. If you do pull one out and it does not have this, we refer to the instructions for the correct part number, and it's always good to add it in if you are replacing the oil pump. For our first step in our installation process, we're going to go ahead and replace the O-ring on the scavenging port. Included in the SNS kit is a new O-ring that you can actually put in there. First thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and take a little bit of oil, lube up the ridge of the port, and add a little bit to the O-ring. One thing to note, you want to insert this by hand. Do not put it on the oil pump and then push the oil pump in. It will not seat correctly. And you gently just press it in until you feel the ridge touch all the way around. Now that we've installed our new O-ring into the scavenging port, we're ready to install the return side of the oil pump onto the pinion shaft. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and insert our O-ring onto the return side of the oil pump into its groove by pressing down and seating it, like so. Once we've done that, we'll go ahead and slide on the return side of the oil pump. To seat the return side of the oil pump, we're pushing on the bottom left-hand corner into the new O-ring in the scavenging port, and nice and seated. For our next step in the installation, we're ready to install our G-rotors. Before we install our G-rotors, I want to note that we rotated the motor to make the pinion shaft have the flat side of the pinion shaft at a 12 o'clock straight up and down. Reason why is because on the G-rotor, you'll have a flat piece right here where it slides on the flat side of the pinion shaft. You want all those facing up. The first G-rotor that we're going to install has a flat piece in the inside and a little lip that's cut off. The full side of the square inside the G-rotor will face towards you. Refer to the S&S instructions to double check to make sure you're having it the right way. Supplied in the S&S kit is some engine assembly lube. We're going to go ahead and apply some into the housing and within the G-rotor itself. Making sure we lube it up really good. Now that we have it lubed up, we're going to go ahead and slide the G-rotor on to the pinion shaft and into the housing. Now we will add the dowel pins into the return side of the oil pump, like so. And on top of the dowel pins, we'll put in the spacer plate. We'll go ahead and add a little bit of assembly lube. And slide it onto the shaft, onto the dowel pins, like so. Now we're ready to install the outer side of the oil pump with the second G-rotor. The second G-rotor will be facing in, like so. The third G-rotor will go on the outside. An easy way to tell the separation between the first G-rotor and the second G-rotor is that little tab, flat tab, inside the rotor itself. It extends all the way through. It's not cut off. Before we install the outer part, we're going to go ahead and add some assembly lube to the plate. Like so. And then we're going to add some assembly lube to the outer of the oil pump. And then we're going to go ahead and add assembly lube to the G-rotor. We're going to get it nice and lubricated very thoroughly. Once we have that done, we'll go ahead and place it into the housing. And then we will slide it onto the shaft, aligning the flat side. And sliding it into the dowel pins and the return side of the oil pump. Now for the third and final G-rotor. You can tell the difference with this one because of the width is much wider than the other two G-rotors. What we're going to go ahead and do, same thing we did before, and lube it up with the assembly lube. And then slide it onto the pinion shaft with the flat sides. Now that we have the oil pump fully installed, we want to go ahead and double check that it doesn't protrude from the mounting holes before installing the cam plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a straight edge and just lay it in over the mounting holes, touching the mounting holes, and see if the oil pump pushes back the straight edge. That means you're not mounted in all the way with your oil pump. Right now we currently are mounted in, but if you do have a problem where it sets out farther than the mounting holes, it's most likely because your scavenging oil ring is not seated fully. So you'll need to remove it and then push it back in and seat it completely. We are good to go to install the cam plate. Now we're ready to install our new cam. Before we do that, we're going to go ahead and take some assembly lube and apply it to the inner cam bearing. And just rub it around real quick. After that, we'll go ahead and put a little bit onto the end of the camshaft. And we will insert it into the inner cam bearing, like so. We're going to go ahead and remove the old oil supply O-ring and install the new one that comes in the S&S kit. We're going to take some assembly lube and just apply it to the O-ring and seat the O-ring into the engine case. Now we're ready to install our cam plate. We went ahead and cleaned it thoroughly and dried it, and we're ready to install it now. Before we install it onto the engine, we're going to go ahead and add assembly lube to the camshaft and the pinion shaft and the bearings that they go to on the cam plate. Once you have everything lubricated, go ahead and slide the cam plate on to both shafts. Included in the S&S kit, there will be 4 new oil pump bolts that will go in the A, B, and C and D locations. We're going to go ahead and run those in loosely right now, and adding a little bit of blue Loctite on them. Now we're ready to go ahead and torque up the cam plate bolts only. We're going to go ahead and follow the sequence that's actually in the S&S instructions and imprinted on the cam plate itself. Starting with number 1, we're going to torque them down to 120 inch-pounds of torque. Before we go ahead and torque down the oil pump bolts, we're going to rotate the crankshaft or flywheel 2 complete rotations, making sure this flat side on the pinion shaft ends up in the same position at a 12 o'clock, like so. Now that we've rotated the motor in 2 full turns, we're going to go ahead and torque down our oil pump bolts to 120 inch-pounds of torque. One thing to note, if you do not know the sequence, you can refer to the S&S instructions. Also, on the cam plate, the oil pump bolts are labeled A, B, C, and D. You start with A, you end with D. Now that we've torqued down the oil pump bolts, we're going to go ahead and rotate the motor again. What we're looking for is any type of binding in the oil pump. If there is, we're going to go ahead and loosen everything up and try reinstalling it again. Our installation is perfect. We're ready to move forward to the next step. Per the factory manual, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our camshaft and our pinion gears with our chain. Before we do that, we're taking our stock spacer and putting it back onto the camshaft. And you'll note that there is a bigger tooth facing straight up on the camshaft, and the flat side of the pinion gear is still facing up at 12 o'clock. By doing this, you should be able to align your timing points perfectly. Now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and take our camshaft bolt and loosely tighten in, adding some blue Loctite to it. And we will do the same for the pinion gear bolt. Now we're ready to torque down the camshaft bolt and the pinion bolt. What we're going to do is we're going to insert this teeth locker in between both gears. This ensures no rotation when torquing down. For the first torque, we're going to go ahead and torque both bolts to 15 foot-pounds of torque. After torquing both of them at 15 foot-pounds of torque, we're going to rotate back 360 degrees by loosening the bolt, and then we will do our final torque. For our final torque sequence, we're going to go ahead and torque down our pinion bolt at 24 foot-pounds of torque and our camshaft bolt to 34 foot-pounds of torque. Now we're ready to reinstall the cam plate cover. Within the S&S kit, you will receive a new gasket that you can use. And we're going to go ahead and use the factory bolts and add a little bit of blue Loctite to each one of them and torque them down to 120 inch-pounds of torque in the sequence per the factory manual. Before moving on and installing our new tappets and push rods, we're going to go ahead and let our new tappets soak in this mason jar full of the same oil that will be ran in the bike overnight. Now that we've let our new tappets soak in motor oil for 24 hours, we're ready to install them. Before we do that, we wanted to bring note to the tappet cuff itself. The new S&S tappet cuff on the bottom is made of billet aluminum, and the stock tappet cuff is made of plastic, which is up top. Now these tappet cuffs are anti-rotation, so making the tappets so they will not turn when the motor is working. When using more horsepower or more performance, we believe it's better to upgrade to this so the tappet will not round out within the plastic. You will also note within the kit, you will receive 2 tappet cuffs made of billet aluminum, and they are labeled R and F, front and rear. You will receive 8 tappet block bolts, 2 tappet cuff bolts, and 2 tappet block gaskets. Now we're ready to install our new tappets. We're going to install into the rear cylinder. The rear cylinder is at top dead center, making for an easy installation for our push rods. Once we're done with the rear, we'll move to the front. Now that we have our new tappets installed into the rear cylinder, we're going to go ahead and take our new S&S tappet cuff or anti-rotation cuff and install it into the rear cylinder. Using the supplied retaining bolt for the tappet cuff, we're going to add a little bit of blue Loctite on there and hand thread it in. Before torquing down the retaining bolt for the tappet cuff, we're going to insert a filler gauge of 0.002 in between the tappet cuff and the tappet. What this will do is it will hold the tappet in place so it will not rotate or bind when torquing down the tappet cuff. We're going to go ahead and torque down the tappet cuff to 100 inch-pounds of torque. With the front cylinder and top dead center, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process with the new tappets and tappet cuff. With the tappet cuffs and tappets installed, we're going to go ahead and rotate the motor 2 full rotations before installing the tappet blocks, making sure that there's no binding, catching, or grabbing. Now we're ready to reinstall our tappet blocks. We're going to start with the rear cylinder first. It's at top dead center, and we're going to go ahead and lay our gasket that's supplied in the S&S kit on. Take the tappet block, set it right on top, and using the supplied bolts in the S&S kit, which come pre-Loctited, we're going to start the threads, then crisscross tighten them, and then torque them down to 140 inch-pounds of torque. We're going to repeat the same process for the front tappet block. Now we're ready to install our new O-rings into the top of the heads for our pushrod tubes. To do so, we're just gonna coat the O-ring a little bit with oil and press them in until they seat. We've done this one already, and now we have secured this one. Using the biggest O-ring within the S&S kit, we're going to place the O-ring into the tappet block and secure it into its location within the ridge. Coating each O-ring a little bit with some oil to help secure it. Now we're ready to install our Quickie push rods. We've collapsed it all the way to make it its shortest length for easy installation. We're going to go ahead and start with the rear cylinder on the intake side, or on the inner side, by slipping the pushrod cover or pushrod tube over the Quickie pushrod and inserting it in. Using a paper clip and rubber band with a bend at the end of the paper clip to create a hook, we're going to go ahead and take the paper clip and insert it into the bottom of the pushrod tube. Then wrap the rubber band onto the top of the head bolt. What this will do is hold the pushrod tube up so you can then adjust the actual pushrod. You want to note the bottom nut on the pushrod itself, the locking nut, you want to keep your finger or hand on it. If it falls down in, you'll have to restart the whole process. An easy way to hold it up is a 1/4 wrench. Grab onto the actual push rod lower, and now you can hand tighten by rotating the top. Now that we've hand tightened the bottom of the push rod into the tappet, making sure it's contact and it's firm, we're going to go ahead and turn the top of the push rod 24 flats or 4 full rotations. A little trick is to take a Sharpie and mark a flat side like so you can indicate the full rotation. Now that we've done 4 full rotations, we're going to take the lock nut on the bottom, spin it up, and using 2 7/16 wrenches, we're going to lock that into place. Now we'll repeat the same thing for the exhaust side. Now that we've tightened these up and they are firm, we're going to go ahead and let them bleed out for about 15 minutes. Then these should be able to rotate both of the push rods. Now that we've let our tappets bleed out for about 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to double check our push rods and make sure they're adjusted correctly. To do so, all you have to do is rotate the push rod. If you can rotate it and it doesn't move around, then it's perfect. If you can't move it, it's too tight, you need to loosen up by turning back a couple turns. And if it's too loose, go ahead and do a half turn and let it bleed out again. And both of them are in good working condition. Now we're going to go ahead and install our pushrod tubes, and using the keepers that are supplied in the package to lock them into place. We're going to remove our paper clip and rubber band and extend the pushrods all the way into the tappet block. Then using a flathead screwdriver, we'll take the top of the pushrod tube and slide it up into the head and set it into the O-ring that's inside the head. Using the supplied keepers within the S&S kit, we're going to go ahead and slide the top piece up into the head, and with a flathead screwdriver in this little opening right here, we will push down on the bottom of the pushrod tube and push the keeper into place, locking it in there. Repeat for the rear. And one more thing I like to do is just take the butt of the screwdriver and press on the top of the keepers, making sure they're locked into place. With the front cylinder in the top dead center, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process and install the new pushrod tubes and push rods into the front cylinder. We finished the installation of the cam chest kit, and we went ahead and put the bike back together per the factory manual. That completes the installation of the S&S cam chest kit. If you like this video, make sure to give us a comment or a like. Always follow us on our social media channels. And for more information about our product, check sscycle.com.